And an in-depth look at the AK-47 trigger job and geometries and how we go about doing it. Also, what not to do. Okay, I've got my Mac 90 here, and recently I put an ALG AKT enhanced trigger in it. It's a wonderful trigger. Does like 90% of all the work for you, but it still has some room for improvement. So the biggest problem with the AK-47 triggers is when you pull the trigger, it's got 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch of travel. You never know when it's going to break and go off. So if we set it up for a 2-stage trigger, then we can pull the trigger. The disconnector comes forward and rests on the back of the hammer just before it's going to go off. And this is where you set your sear engagement surface. Another little push and click, off it goes. So the first thing we want to do, we're going to go kind of backwards on this. We're going to set the reset first. So when hammer goes forward, action slides back, it comes back to the disconnector back here, and this shelf is pretty long on most of the triggers. Excuse me. So we're going to shorten that up a bit so that you have just a little bit of let off, and it puts you right back about where your trigger is going to go again, so that you can reset. And boom, and off you go. So we'll look at the Chinese parts that came with it first. I shined these all up. Some 600 grit sandpaper and a block of wood. There are some videos out there that have you start with 80 grit sandpaper. That's a horrible, horrible idea. Please do not use 80 grit sandpaper on your parts. Most of these probably have a hardened wear surface on the top of them. And if you use 80 grit sandpaper, you're going to grind all that away, and you're going to be left with soft metal underneath for everything to rub on. It's going to start to gall. It's going to be horrible. All you really need to do, and you can see right here on most of it, you just need to get the scratches all go in the direction of the travel. So we've got our hammer and our trigger. Trigger rides forward. Those two pieces line up right there. You're not going to change the angles of anything. All you're going to do is pull out some sandpaper, polish those up a little bit, polish the underneath side of your trigger hooks here, whether it's a single or double hook, doesn't matter. So you can see the stock hammer here. Chucked it up in the vise and just took a file to it and take it off nice a little bit at a time, throw it back in your gun and check it and see to where when you pull your trigger to the back and let it cock back on the disconnector, how much travel do you want your trigger to go forward before it resets back onto the trigger sear hammer hook there. So I've set both of these at 0.075 inches, maybe start at 0.1 inches. Here, let me grab a dial caliper and we'll just look at it here real quick and see. So take your dial caliper, set the end of it on there, run it in, and boom, there we've got 0.075 inches. It worked well with the Chinese parts and with the this ALG trigger. So I set them both the same, and they both feel pretty good. Ran a few mags through it. Everything seems fine. It didn't double. I could not get it to bump fire and everything else. So this is the first thing you'll do, is get that set to where you want it. Then we're going to take the disconnector out. I'll show you here on the Chinese part. And the thing that you want to do, so when it's set up in the trigger, it's spring-loaded to ride forward. We're going to remove from the bottom of it up here so that it can lean forward more and come into contact with the back of the hammer just before your trigger is going to break and go off. That way you've got a nice smooth pull, you can feel it touch, and then click, and off she goes. So instead of got a 1/4 inch long travel, who cares if it's smooth? It always helps, but it needs to be repeatable, it needs to be safe. So do that a little bit and check it, do it a little bit, check it. If you've got a real hair trigger, when it, if we can see in here, I'll shine a flashlight in there. Maybe that'll work a little bit better. If you've got a real hair trigger on it, you don't want that. So take a little more off the front so that the disconnector slides forward, and then You don't want to change the angles. It has to have a positive engagement on it. So if you change your mind and you let off the trigger is going to rock back onto the hammer, and it's going to give you that full contact there. We're not going to do anything with shortening up the hammer sear or trigger sear surface area. We want that to be the full distance, so when it's at rest, you can drop it on the ground, you can bang on it, it's not going to go off. Everything we do is with the disconnector. So, and you'll run it forward, and then just a little bit more, click, and off she goes. Let's check it with a trigger pull gauge and see what we've got. So, toss this up here. I got an old trigger pull gauge. I have to excuse that. It still works though. So, let's stick this in here, and there we go. The trigger starts to move at about 2 pounds, a little bit more, and we're at 2 and 2.5 to 2 3/4 pounds on the trigger pull. If that's a little too light for you, then ALG sends an extra spring in your kit that you can stick on if you want to. Put this on your trigger, gives you a little more touchiness. Works great for me, so I'm going to leave mine just like that. Here, we'll do it again just to verify. I'll clump this up here, put this in, and click, and there we are back again, 2 3/4 pounds. It's repeatable, it's crisp, it's safe. The Chinese parts, I did them also. I'm not going to go through tearing it all apart and sticking those back in, but I ended up with about a 3.5 pound trigger pull on the Chinese parts when it would break. So there it is. No 80 grit sandpaper. Go slow, test it a little bit at a time until it gets where you want it. Smooth your parts up, and most of all, be safe.